Well, I guess we're doing this now. Hello there, everybody. This is TheRatMan, and I figured since I have quite the interest in not just video games, but the video game industry and the video game art form as a whole, I should probably make my own comment on this whole thing, especially since I have developed my own thoughts on the matter and have had discussions about it with others before, so might as well make a video on it, right? This is going to be very unscripted, very live, yada yada. You know, I've said that stuff before. And I apologize if there is any kind of fuzz you hear in the background. It is still summer after all, and I have my AC unit right behind me that is just constantly on, so it's just what happens. Background noise. Now, as for where I stand with the Stop Killing Games initiative, you'll probably see it in the title, but I support it. I support the movement completely. I believe game preservation is vital to the medium, to the art form, to preserving our history, and everything in between. So I think we need to create stricter measures to ensure that the products of the future will be preserved for later generations, and potentially even products of the present and the past. Even the ones that may or may not be beyond the point of no return, as many in the current gaming space are. Which is what this initiative is about. The games that are currently beyond the point of no return, games that will be thrown into the ether to disappear forever once their usefulness has whittled away, essentially. Now, Thor here, many of you will likely know of Thor, aka PirateSoftware, because of his YouTube shorts that have gotten massively popular lately. Obviously, I don't need to explain much about him at this point. He explains himself, saying that he's worked in the games industry for 20 years, etc. He's worked at Blizzard, he's worked at Amazon, all that kind of stuff. His dad was a massive Blizzard veteran, the whole 9 yards, yada yada. And he says that he doesn't support this initiative, and in fact, later on, he insinuates that the initiative is spurred on by some level of, like, ignorance or arrogance, and that he finds the whole thing disgusting because of certain things that I will get into later. But one thing that I will say to preface this is not to insult Thor, but maybe don't use the fact that you've been in video games for 20 years as a thing, because as my dad would say, you can also be wrong for 20 years. So, just because you're experienced in a certain area doesn't mean you necessarily know better than someone who is not part of the in-crew, who's not a developer. Because guess what? Outsiders do things in video games all the time. Without outsiders, there wouldn't be a games industry at all. There wouldn't be an audience to consume the games, to analyze the games, to experience the games outside of the perspective of the developers, because the developers have an extremely biased perspective. The developers are the creators of these things, you know? Obviously, they have a bias towards their own creations, and they believe their creations should function in a very specific way, and it shouldn't go beyond that vision. The problem is, there's certain things that a developer just might not notice because, you know, it's their creation, it's their baby. They don't want to shake things up. They don't want to change things that may or may not hurt their baby, or, you know, make them generally just put more effort into reshaping the way they think about the industry, right? And so, as far as the Stop Killing Games initiative here, what this is essentially trying to prevent publishers like EA, Microsoft, not Microsoft, well, kind of Microsoft now with the amount of publishers and companies that they own. EA, Activision, which is actually Microsoft now, Ubisoft, etc., from creating games that are good, really good on their own, just single-player experiences, and then just hamstringing them with online requirements that inevitably kill them in about a decade. Among other things, right? That was the initial incident. The Crew, as the website here shows, and as Thor highlights, wherever he highlights it. I can't find it now. I was just looking at, yeah, there it is. Right, so The Crew was a racing game, right? The Crew was a racing game published by Ubisoft about 10 years ago now. And it was, the gimmick behind The Crew was that it was this racing game where it was an open world game that you drove around functionally the entirety of the United States. And it was a massive map, this insanely massive map of the United States. Like a really, really insane scale map of the United States. And you would do your stuff on that map. You would go about doing missions, completing, whatever the single player campaign was for that game, etc. And the online component was that you might occasionally come across other players while you're driving around. The idea being that, this map is so massive that, it would be somewhat rare that you come across them, but it's possible. It might happen, and then you can do like a spontaneous street race or something before going your own way, right? Very interesting, very enjoyable. However, when The Crew started reaching its end of life, about a decade later, Ubisoft, instead of just letting the game go, right? Instead of just letting the game go and letting anyone who bought it at that point just keep it, as one would if it were a proper product that was sold to them and the ownership transferred over to them like a proper product would, Ubisoft proceeded to not just delist the game from all storefronts, which that's something a lot of games do, right? That's something plenty of games do, including games with shaky licenses, right? Like one of the reasons potentially cited for the reason of taking down The Crew is potentially the licenses, because I believe Ubisoft themselves cite the licenses for the cars as a reason for the shutdown. However, most games that have that usually just delist themselves from the storefronts. They don't do what Ubisoft did, which is completely remove the game from people's libraries. Literally taking the game away and saying, no, you can't play this anymore. That's not how it's ever worked. That is not how it has ever worked. It has always been delisted from the storefront, because once the license has expired, once the support has dwindled away into nothingness, well, the game has reached end of life. The game is out of the realm of the commercial and into the realm of just functionally abandonware, right? It's just abandonware at that point. People will do with it as they wish, because the developers aren't going to touch it. The developers aren't selling it anymore, right? They've abandoned it. There's nothing happening anymore. There's no license to profit off of anymore. They're not breaching their license by selling the product anymore. People are just taking what they now own, what they've always owned, or should have always owned, and doing with it as they wish. Especially since The Crew also sold, if I recall, let's see. Let's take a look here. The crew, because this was back when... No, I have to specify the game. Come on now. Yeah, exactly. People are making posts on the Reddit about it. It's literally... People bought physical discs of this game. The game has physical copies that Ubisoft has rendered completely unplayable because of their stupid DRM system and the way they've decided to take this game out of the realm of the commercial. Which, again, is completely non-standard. But again, this is the same company that said something along the lines of players should get used to not owning their games. Which is utter horseshit. Utter horseshit. It is fueled by what I can only assume is greed and arrogance. Greed, arrogance, and a complete disregard for the actual art form that is video games. Because video games are art. It is an art. It is a combination of multiple forms of art, in fact, all put together into one. And it creates experiences that cannot be had anywhere else. And so this should be preserved, just like any other art form. Just like any other form of entertainment, it should be preserved. We shouldn't be repeating history and taking our copies of used stuff that we don't want anymore and setting it on fire because we think nobody's going to care about it in the future. There is always going to be people who care about it in the future. How about all of the entire subset of film buffs out there who are desperately trying to find and preserve as many copies of old 1920s and 1930s movies as they possibly can, because the companies back then figured that once they were off the market, nobody needed them anymore, so they just started setting them on fucking fire. That is the literal destruction of art. This is the digital equivalent of that. Ubisoft is going out of their way to completely wipe the crew from existence. At least as far as they can do so, right? They're trying to wipe the crew from existence, whether they know it or not. And so clearly, these companies can't be trusted to preserve their own legacies, Blizzard. Yeah, I'm talking to you. This is where I get to you, Thor. Blizzard doesn't seem to have a respect for its own legacy. Like how when it forced everyone who owned Warcraft 3 to upgrade to the reforged version, which is a completely broken and inferior version of Warcraft 3, a game with an actual tangible legacy and influence on the RTS genre and video games as a whole. Why should we just let Blizzard shit on the history of this entire medium? Why? Why? That is what I ask you. Why? And then he goes on further to explain. He says something along the lines of like, oh, look at this. Look at this. There's barely any. There's like 120 to 99 players playing at any given time now. It's like, well, why would we want to preserve that? Like, what is it that he says? It's not about running a live service game on those many players. It's about preserving the game for future generations to see. It's not about trying to preserve the game as if it were still at its peak from back in the day. It's about maintaining the legacy, about maintaining the history, and not letting it disappear into the ether for the sake of some company's greed. This isn't about I get to sound like, not to sound like the Joker, but holy shit, the quote works here. It's not about the money. It's about it's about sending a message, and the message is the preservation of art. Like, someone might want to go over the history, someone in the future, like 2 decades, 4 decades maybe in the future, they might want to write a thesis, a treatise or something on the history of, say, racing video games and how they've had an influence on modern car culture. Because they have had an influence on modern car culture. More and more people have been able to get into modern car culture because of racing video games. And if they can't access games like The Crew, which has this bevy of licensed cars from back in the day, what are they going to do? How are we going to preserve the history and influence of this art form on the wider culture? And also, these people bought these games. Who the fuck are you to take it away from them? How is it not their fucking property? They bought the game. The game was sold to them as... I know I'm starting to sound like the Doom Rant, but I can't help it. When it starts coming to games as an art form, I can't help but get angry and impassioned. I just can't help myself. But it's like, who are you to tell people what games they are and aren't allowed to play? Like, these are people who bought these games that were sold to them as goods, as fully formed products, under no stipulation that these would ever be taken away from them. And that's the other thing that Thor really likes to go over here in his 2 videos detailing why he doesn't like the Stop Killing Games initiative, is when he mentions how broad the initiative is. He mentions the edge case of MMOs. MMOs are exempt from this to begin with because MMOs function off of a subscription model. And I can guarantee you the reason he talks so much about MMOs in this is because he worked at Blizzard, a company that lives off of World of Warcraft. Or has lived off of World of Warcraft for decades. Maybe not now, because they have a few other things going for them. But actually, you know what? No, maybe now. World of Warcraft and, like, Hearthstone. StarCraft hasn't really been doing anything lately. Overwatch shit the bed. Nobody trusts Blizzard anymore, considering they, I think the only other positive thing they got going for them right now is Diablo 4. Nobody trusts Blizzard right now because they're steeped in scandals. You know, the Cosby Room. All that stuff. But it's like, yeah, the guy said he worked at Blizzard for a long time, and his dad is a Blizzard veteran as well, so it's like, yeah, of course. Of course the Blizzard guy is thinking about this stuff in terms of MMOs and player counts and viability numbers and all this shit. It's like, that's not the point, man. MMOs were sold as subscription models. You're going in there knowing that eventually it's going to disappear. That is the fate of MMOs. That's what happens every time. And even then, MMOs, a lot of them go through revivals all the time. Toontown Rewritten and City of Heroes Homecoming are amazing examples of this, of private fan servers that are thriving now. There are these thriving recreations of the game from back in the day. It's like, even MMOs can be preserved, so it's like, yeah, MMOs would be exempt from this because they're not being sold to you as a fully formed product from the very beginning, right? As a singular product that you own, right? That's the nature of a subscription model. But even then, they can still be preserved for the future. They don't have to dwindle away and disappear, right? What would happen if, Blizzard goes bankrupt, or Blizzard just decides that WoW is not viable anymore, and they decide to shut it down. Should we just let World of Warcraft, one of the most culturally influential video games of all time, just disappear? Should we just let it vanish into the ether? And prevent anyone from experiencing it ever again or studying it? No, absolutely not. This stuff needs to be preserved. We need to protect it because clearly the companies don't care about protecting it. So the only other option we've got is to create some sort of regulation within the government that prevents them from just tossing away their cultural products like they're bags of potato chips, to quote Scott the Woz when talking about Call of Duty. It's like, that's what this is about. It's not about viability of player numbers. It's not about, it's not about the licenses, which doesn't matter because it's already left the realm of the commercial, right? It's already left that zone, which means that, God, what am I thinking? It's already left that, which means the licenses aren't being used by the company to sell anything to begin with, right? So that point is moot, right? They don't have to sell the game anymore. They just have to not take it away from the people who already bought it and own it. And it doesn't matter what the fuck their EULAs or TOSs say. We already know. There's already a history. A legal history behind that stuff. We know that stuff isn't legally enforceable. Like, once the chips are down and we enter the courtroom, that stuff is not legally enforceable. You can't do that. Those are not reasonable contracts for multiple reasons. One is because there's a bunch of random stuff in these contracts that were drummed up by lawyers to cover all possible bases that cannot be reasonably expected to exist in any of these contracts. As well as there's no reasonable expectation that any normal person would read these contracts. And then on top of all of that, there's no negotiation within these contracts. The person clicking accept on the EULAs and the TOSs and stuff like that, they have no method of negotiating the contracts to begin with. So the contracts have significantly less, if any, legally binding authority in any form. So even that stuff is moot at best. Well, for the most part, it's moot. When the chips are down. So it's like, yeah, it's about preservation. It's about ownership. That's what this is about. It's not this, again, he gets weirdly upset about the whole thing, and he gets oddly rude to Ross. Like, Ross is just trying to preserve the games. He's trying to preserve the history of this art form and shit, and like, he treats Ross like he's this just ignorant gamer who doesn't know any better about the industry because he's a developer. Thor is the developer here, right? Like, oh yeah, this is the part where he describes the initiative as disgusting. Right? Because he thinks that this stuff makes it disgusting. When it's like, and again, that shit doesn't fucking matter. The game is sold to you as a product that you own. The license is bullshit. The EULAs don't matter. They're not legally binding. If you go to court No reasonable fucking court is going to say, oh yeah, obviously everyone who bought those games knew they were buying licenses to those games. No, the game is being sold to you as a product. It's a purchase button. It is a purchase button. You are purchasing the game. That is what's happening for the end consumer. The end consumer is being told they are purchasing the game. The EULA bullshit is just legalese to cover their ass. Oh my god, dude. That's one of the it's one of the biggest problems. There is a multitude of problems here, Thor. That's the thing. There are a multitude of problems with this whole initiative. A multitude of problems that the initiative is trying to tackle. That's what it is. That's the license thing is one of them. The license thing, that's one of the issues that it's trying to tackle. Anything to deal with the fact that companies are effectively just taking away ownership from just people. From people. Everybody. They're just taking ownership of games away from people, even people who buy the physical discs for the games. It's like they never bought a license to the game. They bought a physical copy. So why is their physical copy being rendered moot? Yeah. So, yeah, the whole point of this is to force companies to actually have an end-of-life plan that isn't just throw it away. Because, one, it's bad legal precedent to just throw away games that people bought and stop them from being able to own anything anymore, right? That's bad legal precedent already, and allows companies to do a whole host of other bad shit. And then on top of that, it's also cultural preservation. We need to preserve these games. And so yeah, we need to force the companies to do that. That's another problem. I don't know if you understand I don't know if you view games as an art form, Thor. I would hope you do, with your whole motto of go make games, telling people to go make games and all that. I would hope you view games as a form of culture, as a form of art. But if you don't, I question why, right? Especially since you're making a game like Heartbound, which seems like a very artistic game. And yeah, these games, I don't know what else to tell you in that case, right? Like, if you don't agree about preserving games for the sake of the art form and the culture and the history of it, rather than just the legal stuff behind it, which is a problem, I don't know what else to tell you in that case. At that point, we just straight up disagree on the matter of the preservation of video games. And then the part where he calls this stuff disgusting is because of these reasons the ECI could pass, right? He calls this disgusting because he thinks it makes the movement come off as disingenuous. As disingenuous, right? For treating things trivially, basically, by using this sort of reasoning to explain why their initiative could work. When really, I think, like, what Ross is trying to get across here, in regards to reasons why the ECI could pass, is these are simply the practical political realities of the EU that we have to take advantage of in order to get to where we want to be. Right? Like, we just have to accept that we can't just appeal to politicians in regards to the preservation of art and, the legal nonsense that is EULAs and licenses and all this other garbage, right? We can't just appeal to them and tell them that this is wrong and convince them, right? Because plenty of them either don't care, don't understand, or might just straight up be bought out by the major companies to begin with. So we just have to accept that some of the political reality is there and try and use it to our advantage. So yeah, stuff like politicians like easy wins. Yeah, we have to take advantage of that fact, right? The fact that most politicians don't care about video games and they like easy wins, well, all we have to do is effectively tell most of the politicians, again, most of them, that, hey, the people really like this initiative, and it's called it's a cultural preservation initiative, and it also, gets one at the evil, corporate overlord. The people love that stuff. The people love that stuff, right? They're absolutely going to vote for you if you support this. You'll get a ton of easy votes for this, right? So the politicians who don't care or don't understand, you can just tell them that kind of stuff, give them the practical reality of supporting this, and they'll be on board. Let the ones who care and know what's going on actually go through the details of everything, and have the guys who care about the easy wins get their easy wins, because we just have to compromise on that. There just has to be some level of compromise there. So it's like, yeah, we have to go over some of this stuff. Like, the law is already unclear on this practice. The initiative can help make the law clear on this practice. Even if the law is broad, that doesn't necessarily mean it's bad. Like, a law, as Ross said in his own video, which is right down here, actually. As Ross says in his own video, you can't make a law that confronts every possible scenario. The courts are going to have to go over the details of the little individual scenarios here and there that crop up, right? The law itself should be able to get across what the broad concept of what we're trying to do, right? The initiative is in line with other consumer policies in the EU. Done. Easy. Right? Why is that a bad thing? Why is it a bad thing to create another initiative to regulate another product that is in line with the way the EU regulates all their other products? How is that just inherently bad or disgusting? And then it's a diversion from more serious topics. Again, this is another political reality thing. Yeah, it's not exactly nice. It's not exactly nice, but also the EU isn't exactly doing jack shit for anything else lately. The EU really doesn't do much else, so might as well do something. Might as well try to force their hand on something, since clearly they don't bother with much else. So yeah, it's all a whole thing. Thor describes it all as very disgusting and doesn't support it because of effectively, like, these fringe cases. Like, he's hyper focused on MMOs and fringe cases where people will somehow try to, like, DDoS and hack a game into oblivion so that it can then cease functioning and become one of these preserved games. But, like, one, they'd have to buy the game a fuck ton for the live service game to function like that to begin with, unless you explicitly make your live service game free to play, at which point you have a whole other business model that you're dealing with, which is a whole other thing. But also, like, people just don't do that. Like, I don't... The whole opening... Like, I think he also mentions how, oh, this would force companies to release their binaries, release binaries and stuff, which would open them up to exploitation. It's like, okay, one, the binaries would only be released during end of life for the sake of players making their own private community servers, and private community servers are usually pretty friggin' good about getting rid of exploiters and hackers, so that's already a pretty moot point. And then the mass DDoSers and the like is simply a matter of most DDoS attacks don't do much in the end. Like, DDoS attacks are very primitive and usually very ineffective in the long run. It's like, yeah, unless if your live service is being run by, like, an indie company, it might be able to shut down the game. But most live service games are either AA at least to full-on AAA. So I see very minimal scenarios in which, a very minimal amount of scenarios, again, very fringe scenarios, in which a mass DDoS and hacking attempt somehow manages to force a game to shut down for good and enter its end-of-life plan and just distribute the game for free to everybody. When the entire point, the initiative, if passed, would have, it wouldn't even do that. It would give the game for free in a functional offline state to everyone who bought it. So it's not like the DDoSers and the hackers would just be getting a free game. You'd still have to have bought into the game initially to do it. And yeah, it's all very bizarre, very fringe stuff that Thor seems to be hyper focused on, and I don't know why he's so focused on that. It's like I get it, you want the law to try and cover more bases, but the point is that you make the law cover a basic number of scenarios, and more importantly, a broad concept. And then you take the individual specific scenarios to courts, and the courts help sort out the specifics of those other concepts and set precedent for how other more out there scenarios go. Right? That's how a lot of American law functions, especially. A lot of American law functions like this, where we have some very broad initial laws on the books, but we also have some very hyper-specific laws and bylaws and all this other stuff that has been created over time through our court system figuring out the details and the spirit of the law versus the letter of the law and going through all this stuff. So it's like, yeah, just because we don't have literally every little possible scenario figured out from the beginning doesn't mean this is a bad initiative or that it's created out of ignorance or anything like that. It is an initiative created from an understanding that you cannot trust these major corporations with the ability to just destroy products of culture and art. There needs to be a leash put on these companies. And if that means every company, big and small, will have to come up with a plan before they launch their live service game specifically to ensure that it is preserved once they have ceased to make the game, once they have ceased support for the game, well, then people are just going to have to suck it up and do it. Car company, again, as Ross himself explained, car companies lost their shit about and complained when seatbelt legislation was going into effect, saying, oh, it's going to disrupt the entire industry. Yeah, well then suck it up, bitch. It's for public safety. Suck it up and put seatbelts in your damn cars. It's like, oh, well, this is going to, every game is, all our live service games are going to take so much longer to develop, and, it's gonna be a bit more costly. Okay, well, for most of you then, you're just going to have to suck it up and create an end-of-life plan. It's not even that costly to do. You just have to come up with you just have to know beforehand what you're going to do when you stop supporting your game. Like a decade down the line. And one last thing. Thor, you do not speak for all developers. You do not speak for the entire game development community, so stop pretending that you do. Again, yeah, you've been in the games industry for about 20-something years now. You can also be wrong for 20 years. And there's plenty of developers that support this initiative. So quit acting like you know better than everybody else. Just because you're bigger or you've been in Blizzard and Amazon, of all things, for longer. Get off your damn high horse and actually talk to people who support the initiative, rather than making these videos here, these two, just spitting in their faces, telling them they're wrong, and then not giving an alternative solution to the problem. Alright? Anyway, I'm sorry, this is a very long video. I've been recording for 42 minutes now. I'm probably not going to edit it whatsoever. I'm going to most certainly, at most, I'll probably add a backing track to the whole thing, just so there's some sort of music. But, yeah. I get very impassioned about this subject, so I felt the need to talk about it. So, this is my rant. If you want to see specifically what Thor says, go ahead and check out these two videos. I summarized what I could. About them, and specifically the main problems that I had with what he was saying, like the main things he said that I had an issue with, right? So, yeah, that's about it for me. And also, as of recording this, I will be going to PAX next week. So, yeah. This has been TheRatMan, and I will see you all later.